Hi everyone, my name is Margaret Mitchell, and I'm 47 years old. What I'm about to share with you still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Last Tuesday morning, I was at the grocery store picking up ingredients for my daughter's birthday dinner when I overheard something that made my blood run cold. Two women in the cereal aisle were talking, and one of them mentioned my name. "Poor Margaret," she said. "David told my husband she's been having these episodes. Says she's been acting completely irrational, forgetting things, even talking to herself. He's worried about her mental state." This story changed my life forever. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe and hit that like button. Where are you watching from? I stood there frozen, clutching a box of cornflakes so tightly I nearly crushed it. David is my husband of 23 years, and those women were talking about me like I was some fragile, broken thing. The worst part? I hadn't been experiencing any of the things they described. I wasn't forgetting things, I wasn't having episodes, and I certainly wasn't talking to myself. But somehow, David had been painting this picture of me to our neighbors, our friends, maybe even our family. The drive home felt like the longest 15 minutes of my life. My mind was racing, replaying every conversation David and I had shared over the past few months. Had I missed something? Was I actually losing my grip on reality and just didn't realize it? But the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that I was perfectly fine. I'd been working full-time as a marketing coordinator, managing our household, helping our daughter Emma with her college applications, and maintaining our social commitments without any problems whatsoever. Emma Mitchell, our 21-year-old daughter, had just moved back home after finishing her degree in graphic design. She's always been perceptive, inheriting her father's analytical mind, but thankfully my sense of loyalty. Emma and I have grown closer over the years, especially since she's matured into such a thoughtful young woman. She works part-time at a local design firm while she builds her portfolio, and she's been nothing but supportive of both David and me through what she probably thought were normal marital adjustments. My best friend Sarah Chen has been my anchor through thick and thin for over 15 years. We met at a parent-teacher conference when our kids were in elementary school, and we bonded over terrible cafeteria coffee and shared eye rolls at overzealous helicopter parents. Sarah works as a nurse practitioner at the community health center, which means she has both the medical knowledge and the practical wisdom to help me figure out what's really going on. She's also brutally honest, which I've always appreciated, even when it stings. But David Thompson Mitchell, my husband who I thought I knew inside and out, had apparently been conducting some kind of campaign behind my back. David works in insurance, and he's always been methodical, careful with details. He's the type of man who plans our vacation itineraries months in advance and keeps spreadsheets for our household budget. For him to be spreading stories about my mental health wasn't some careless gossip. It was deliberate. When I got home, I found David in his home office, typing away on his laptop like nothing had happened. He looked up and smiled that same warm smile that had charmed me when we first met at a college friend's wedding all those years ago. "How was the store? Did you remember to get the candles for Emma's cake?" he asked, and something about his tone made my stomach turn. Was he testing me? Waiting for me to forget something so he could add it to whatever narrative he was building? "I got everything," I said carefully, watching his face for any reaction. "David, can I ask you something? Have you been talking to people about me? About my health?" The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. His eyes flickered, and he set down his pen with just a little too much precision. "What do you mean? I'm always concerned about your well-being, Margaret. We all are." That phrase, "we all are," sent chills down my spine. Who was we? How many people had he spoken to? And what exactly had he been telling them? Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to everything. I noticed how David would make little comments about my memory when Emma was around. "Your mother forgot to lock the back door again," he'd say with a concerned sigh, even though I was certain I had locked it. Or, "Margaret, you left the coffee maker on all night. That's not like you." Except it was exactly like me to turn off the coffee maker, something I'd been doing religiously for over 2 decades. I began to realize that David wasn't just telling people I was mentally unstable. He was actively trying to make me question my own sanity. Every small comment, every concerned look, every gentle correction was part of a larger pattern. The man I'd built a life with, raised a daughter with, and trusted with my deepest fears and dreams, was systematically undermining my credibility and my confidence. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever could have imagined. This wasn't just about our marriage falling apart. This was about David trying to rewrite our entire history to make himself look like the long-suffering, devoted husband of an unstable woman. If he wanted to leave me, why couldn't he just say so? Why did he have to destroy my reputation and make me doubt my own mind in the process? And that's when the pattern snapped into place. That discovery came when I was looking for David's old charger in his desk drawer. I wasn't snooping, at least not intentionally. My phone had died, and I needed to charge it before Emma got home from her after-school job at the local bookstore. David kept extra cables in his home office, and I'd borrowed them plenty of times before. But when I pulled open the middle drawer, I found something that made my hands shake. It was a small notebook, the kind David used for his engineering projects, filled with his precise handwriting. At first glance, I thought it was work notes. Then I saw my name at the top of a page, followed by what looked like a timeline. March 15th, left stove on. Didn't remember doing it. March 22, couldn't find car keys. Accused me of moving them. April 3rd, forgot Emma's parent-teacher conference. My stomach dropped as I flipped through page after page of documented incidents, some real, some completely fabricated, all written in David's methodical script. He had been building a case against me, creating evidence of my supposed mental decline. The worst part was how he'd twisted perfectly normal moments into signs of instability. Yes, I had forgotten about Emma's conference, but only because David had told me he'd already rescheduled it. The car keys incident had happened because David actually had moved them to clean the counter. I heard the front door open and quickly closed the notebook, my heart pounding. Emma's voice carried down the hallway as she called out her usual greeting. "Mom, I'm home." The weirdest thing happened at work today. I shoved the drawer closed and walked to the kitchen, trying to compose myself. Emma was hanging her jacket on the back of a chair, her dark hair pulled back in the messy bun she always wore after long shifts. "What happened, honey?" I asked, grateful for the distraction from the notebook's contents burning in my mind. "Mrs. Chen came into the bookstore today, from down the street. She asked me how I was handling everything with you." Emma frowned, clearly confused. When I asked what she meant, she got all flustered and said Dad had mentioned you were going through a difficult time. "Mom, what was she talking about?" The blood drained from my face. David had been talking to our neighbors too. Mrs. Chen lived 3 houses down and walked her dog past our house every morning. She'd always been friendly, waving, and occasionally stopping to chat about the weather or compliment my garden. "I'm not sure, sweetheart," I said carefully, not wanting to drag Emma into this mess, but needing to understand how far David's campaign had spread. "Did she say anything else?" Emma's expression grew more concerned. "She said if I ever needed someone to talk to about having a parent with memory problems, her sister went through something similar. Mom, You don't have memory problems. You remember everything. You reminded me about my dentist appointment last week when I completely forgot. Before I could respond, David appeared in the kitchen doorway. He must have heard us talking because there was something watchful in his expression, like he was gauging how much of the conversation he'd missed. "How was work, Emma?" he asked, but his eyes were on me. "Fine, but Dad, why are you telling people Mom has memory problems? Mrs. Chen seemed to think she was sick or something." David's face shifted into an expression of gentle concern that I was beginning to recognize as completely calculated. "I never said your mother was sick, Em. I might have mentioned that she's been under a lot of stress lately. Sometimes stress can affect how we remember things." "But Mom isn't stressed," Emma protested. "Well, not more than usual. Are you stressed, Mom?" I looked between my daughter's genuine worry and my husband's false concern, feeling trapped. If I denied being stressed, would David use that as evidence of my denial and confusion? If I admitted to stress, would I be confirming his narrative? "Everyone has stress, honey," I said finally. "But I'm managing just fine." David's slight smile told me I'd given the wrong answer. "See, this is what I'm talking about," he said to Emma, his voice full of loving exasperation. "Your mother pushes through everything. She won't admit when she needs help." Emma looked between us, clearly sensing tension she didn't understand. "Is everything okay with you two?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. This was the moment where I could either pretend everything was fine, allowing David to continue his careful destruction of my credibility, or I could start fighting back. But how do you fight someone who's been systematically building a case against your sanity while still managing to sound like the perfect, concerned husband? "Actually, Emma," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "there's something we need to discuss as a family." David's eyes sharpened, and I could see him calculating his next move. But I had something he didn't know about yet. I had found his notebook, which meant I finally had proof of what he was really doing. What I hadn't expected was Emma's reaction to what I was about to tell her. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the familiar yellow walls seeming to press closer as the three of us stood in this awkward triangle of tension. The late afternoon light streaming through the window cast long shadows across the linoleum floor, and I could hear the old refrigerator humming its steady rhythm, a sound that had always been comforting but now felt ominous in the silence. Emma's backpack slid from her shoulder to the floor with a soft thud, her textbooks visible through the partially open zipper. She was still in her work uniform from her part-time job at the campus bookstore. Her name tag slightly crooked, and there was something so young and vulnerable about her in that moment that I almost lost my nerve. David moved closer, positioning himself near the kitchen island in a way that seemed casual but felt strategic. His work clothes were still crisp despite the long day, his tie perfectly knotted, every inch the successful professional. But I could see the calculation behind his concerned expression now, the way he was already preparing his narrative. "What kind of family discussion?" Emma asked, glancing between us with growing unease. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, a nervous gesture she'd had since childhood. "Are you guys getting divorced or something?" The word hung in the air like a physical presence. David's face immediately shifted into that practiced expression of patient sadness I was becoming so familiar with. "Your mother's been under a tremendous amount of pressure lately," he said, his voice taking on that carefully modulated tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "I think she's feeling overwhelmed and maybe looking for someone to blame for her stress." "I'm not looking for someone to blame," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I'm looking at the person who's been systematically lying about me to our neighbors and friends. Emma's eyes widened. What do you mean lying? David sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. This is exactly what I've been worried about. Your mother's been having some difficulties lately, and now she's starting to see conspiracies where there aren't any. The kitchen island stood between us like a battlefield, its granite surface reflecting the overhead light. I could see Emma's coffee mug from this morning still sitting in the sink, a small reminder of the normal morning we'd shared just hours ago. Everything had felt so ordinary then. Now it felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to either save my marriage or watch it shatter completely. I found your notebook, David, I said quietly. The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. For just a moment, the mask of concern slipped, and I saw something harder underneath. Then it was back, but Emma had caught it too. I could see her confusion deepening. What notebook? She asked. David recovered quickly. I've been keeping notes about your mother's behavior because I'm worried about her. I thought if we needed to talk to a doctor, it might help to have specific examples. Examples of what? Emma's voice had gotten smaller, like she was afraid of the answer. Times when your mother seemed confused or forgetful. Instances where she might have misremembered conversations or events. David's voice was gentle, almost clinical. I never intended for her to find it, because I knew it would upset her. I felt the familiar doubt creeping in, the way David's reasonable tone made my accusations sound paranoid and overblown. But then I remembered the careful entries in his notebook, the dates and times, the clinical language describing normal human moments as symptoms of decline. He wrote down that I forgot where I put my reading glasses, I said to Emma, my voice growing stronger. He documented that I asked him the same question twice in one evening about his work schedule. Normal things that everyone does, but he wrote them down like they were evidence of something wrong with me. Emma looked from me to David, her young face struggling to process what she was hearing. Dad, why would you write stuff like that down? Because I love your mother, David said, and his voice carried such convincing sincerity that for a moment I almost believed him myself. When someone you love starts showing signs of cognitive decline, you want to help them get the best possible care. But the first step is admitting there's a problem. The word decline hit me like a physical blow. It was so clinical, so final. I gripped the edge of the counter, feeling the cool granite under my palms. I am not in cognitive decline, I said, each word deliberate and clear. I am a functioning adult woman whose husband has been telling our neighbors that I have memory problems so severe that our daughter has to help manage my care. Emma's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet kitchen. What? David's composure flickered again, and this time he couldn't quite hide his irritation. I never said anything like that. Mrs. Chen offered to share her sister's experience dealing with a parent's memory problems, I continued, looking directly at Emma. She seemed to think I was showing signs of serious decline. Those weren't ideas she came up with on her own. The silence stretched between us, filled with the tick of the wall clock and the distant sound of traffic outside. Emma stood very still, and I could almost see her mind working, trying to reconcile the father she'd always trusted with what she was hearing. Is that true, Dad? She asked finally. David spread his hands in a gesture of helpless honesty. I may have expressed concern about your mother's stress levels affecting her memory. If Mrs. Chen misunderstood the severity of the situation, that wasn't my intention. It was masterfully done. He'd admitted to just enough to explain Mrs. Chen's reaction while making it sound like an innocent misunderstanding. But I could see Emma studying his face with new attention, looking for something she'd never had to look for before. "Show me the notebook," she said suddenly. Both David and I turned to stare at her. In the fading afternoon light, my daughter looked older somehow, like she was growing up in real time. "If Dad's just documenting things to help you get better medical care, then there's nothing wrong with me seeing it, right?" Emma's voice was calm, but there was something steel-like underneath it that reminded me suddenly of my own mother. David's face went very still. "Emma, that's private medical information about your mother's condition." "What condition?" Emma shot back. "5 minutes ago, you said it was just stress affecting her memory? Now it's a medical condition with private information?" The kitchen felt electric with tension. I realized that Emma had inherited more than just my mother's steel backbone. She had also gotten David's ability to spot inconsistencies and press on them. David looked between us, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw him calculating and coming up short. "The notebook is upstairs in my office," I said quietly. "Would you like to see it?" Emma nodded, but David stepped forward quickly. "I don't think that's a good idea. Your mother is already upset and confused. Reading clinical observations about her behavior will only make things worse." "Then you read it to us," Emma said. "Read us some of these observations about Mom's behavior." The silence that followed was different from the others. This one was loaded with the weight of truth hanging in the balance, and I could see David realizing that his carefully constructed narrative was beginning to crumble. But what none of us expected was the sound of the front door opening, followed by a familiar voice calling out a greeting that would change everything. "Hello? Anyone home?" My heart stopped. It was Sarah's voice, bright and cheerful, completely oblivious to the powder keg she was walking into. I heard her footsteps in the hallway, the familiar sound of her setting down her purse on the side table. David's face went white. In all his careful planning, he hadn't anticipated Sarah showing up right now, in the middle of this confrontation. Emma looked between her father and me, her expression sharpening with new understanding. "In here," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. Sarah appeared in the doorway moments later, her usual warm smile faltering as she took in the scene. The three of us standing in the kitchen like we were facing off in some kind of standoff. The tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Oh," she said, her smile becoming uncertain. "Did I interrupt something?" "Actually," Emma said before either David or I could respond, "your timing is perfect. We were just talking about Dad's notebook, the one where he's been documenting Mom's behavior." Sarah's face went completely blank. She looked at David with an expression I'd never seen before, like she was seeing a stranger. "Emma," David said quickly, "Sarah doesn't need to be involved in this family discussion." "Doesn't she?" Emma's voice carried a new edge. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like Sarah's been involved in a lot of family discussions lately." The silence that followed was excruciating. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, and I watched as understanding began to dawn in her eyes. She looked at David, then at me, then back at David. "What notebook?" she asked quietly. David opened his mouth, but Emma spoke first. "The one where Dad's been writing down everything Mom supposedly forgets or gets confused about. He says it's to help her get medical care, but he won't let us see it. And somehow, Mrs. Chen got the impression that Mom is having serious mental problems." Sarah's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, and then something that looked like horror. She stared at David with wide eyes. "David," she said slowly. Please tell me you haven't been telling people that Margaret is mentally ill. I've expressed legitimate concerns about stress-related memory issues, David said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Having to explain himself to both Emma and Sarah seemed to be wearing him down. That's not what I asked, Sarah said, and her voice was sharp now. Have you been telling people that she's mentally unstable? The question hung in the air between them. I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for his answer. Emma was watching Sarah with fascination, like she was seeing her in a completely new light. I may have mentioned that I was concerned about her mental state, David admitted finally. Sarah took a step backward as if he'd slapped her. Oh my God! David, what have you done? I've been documenting legitimate concerns about my wife's well-being, David said, but there was something desperate creeping into his voice now. By telling people she's crazy? Sarah's voice was rising. By making her think she's losing her mind? I never said she was crazy. Then what did you say? Emma demanded. Exactly what did you say? David looked between the three of us, trapped, for the first time since this whole nightmare began. He seemed to realize that his carefully constructed narrative was completely falling apart. I said that I was worried about her mental stability, he said finally. That she'd been forgetting things, getting confused, acting irrationally. I said I was concerned she might need professional help. The words fell into the kitchen like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that seemed to spread outward from where we stood. Sarah put her hand over her mouth. David, how could you do that to her? Do what? David's voice was getting defensive now. Express concern about my wife's mental health? Lie about your wife's mental health, Emma corrected coldly. Because that's what this is, isn't it, Dad? You've been lying about Mom to justify whatever it is you're planning to do. Sarah was staring at David like she'd never seen him before. Is that true? Have you been lying about Margaret? But before David could answer, Sarah's expression changed again, and I could see her putting pieces together in her mind. Wait, she said slowly. Is this why you've been asking me all those questions about Margaret? About whether I'd noticed her acting strangely? David's silence was answer enough. Sarah's face crumpled. Oh God, you were trying to get me to agree with you, to back up your story. The kitchen felt like it was shrinking around us. I watched my husband's face as his last ally began to slip away from him, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel crazy. I felt vindicated. But what Sarah said next changed everything again. David, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. How long has this been going on? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between us like he was calculating his next move. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the kitchen window cast harsh shadows across his face, making him look older somehow, more worn down. I don't know what you mean, he said finally. Yes, you do. Sarah's voice was gaining strength now. How long have you been planning this? How long have you been laying the groundwork to make people think Margaret is unstable? Emma moved closer to me, and I felt her hand brush against my arm. It was such a small gesture, but it anchored me to the moment, reminded me that I wasn't alone in this anymore. I haven't been planning anything, David insisted, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. I've just been concerned about my wife. Concerned enough to document it? Emma asked, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You said you've been documenting your concerns. What does that mean exactly? David's jaw tightened. I could see the muscle working there, the way it always did when he was frustrated or cornered. It was a tell I'd learned to read over 23 years of marriage, though I'd never thought I'd be using it against him like this. It means I've been keeping track of incidents, he said carefully. Times when Margaret seemed confused or forgetful. Times when her behavior was concerning. What incidents? I found my voice finally, though it came out rougher than I'd intended. What behavior? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But it was gone so quickly, I might have imagined it. The morning you couldn't find your keys and accused me of hiding them, he said. The time you forgot Emma's birthday dinner. The way you've been crying over nothing, getting upset about small things. Each example hit like a physical blow, because they were all real. They had all happened. But hearing him list them like evidence in a case against me made them sound so much worse than they had felt at the time. My keys were in your jacket pocket, I said quietly. I found them there the next day. You must have put them there and forgotten, David replied smoothly. And I didn't forget Emma's birthday dinner, I continued, my voice getting stronger. You told me it was canceled because she was sick. Emma's head snapped toward her father. What? I was never sick. You told me Mom wasn't feeling well and wanted to reschedule. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Sarah's face had gone pale, and she was staring at David with something that looked like horror. You told her 2 different stories, Sarah said slowly, working it out as she spoke. You made sure they both thought the other one was the problem. David opened his mouth to respond, but Emma cut him off. Oh my God, she breathed. Dad, you've been gaslighting her. You've been systematically making her think she's losing her mind. The word hung between us like an accusation. Gaslighting. I'd heard the term before, of course, but I'd never thought it could apply to my marriage, to my life. It sounded too dramatic, too calculating for what I'd thought was just a rough patch between David and me. But looking at his face now, seeing the way his expression had shuttered closed, I realized that was exactly what it was. Calculated, deliberate, methodical. That's ridiculous, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. I would never deliberately hurt Margaret. Then why do I have evidence that says otherwise? The new voice made us all turn. Sarah was holding up her phone, and her face was grim. What evidence? David's voice was sharp now, all pretense of casual conversation gone. Sarah's fingers moved across her phone screen. I've been recording this conversation. Started when I walked in and heard you listing all of Margaret's supposed problems like you were reading from a script. My heart lurched. Sarah, you didn't need to— Yes, I did, she interrupted, her eyes never leaving David's face. Because I had a feeling something like this might happen, and I was right. She held up the phone. I have you on recording, telling Emma that Margaret forgot her birthday dinner, and then I have you admitting you told Emma that Margaret wasn't feeling well. 2 completely different stories. Emma was staring at her father with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, exactly, but something colder. More final. Dad, she said quietly. How long has this been going on? I don't know what you're talking about, David replied, but he was looking at the phone in Sarah's hand, not at Emma. Sarah's obviously trying to create drama where none exists. Don't, Sarah said firmly. Don't you dare try to make this about me. I've watched my best friend become a shadow of herself over the past year, and now I know why. I felt something shifting inside me, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. "The grocery list," I said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at me. "Last month, you asked me to pick up specific things from the store, wrote me a list. But when I came home with everything, you said I'd gotten it all wrong, that you'd never asked for any of those things." David's jaw tightened. "You misunderstood what I wrote." "I kept the list," I continued, my voice getting stronger. "It's still in my purse. Your handwriting, David, clear as day." Emma stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I need to see that list." "Emma, this is between your mother and me?" David said, his voice taking on an edge I'd heard more and more often lately. "No, it's not," Emma shot back. "Not when you've been making me complicit in whatever this is. Not when you've been using me to validate your lies." She turned to me, and I could see tears gathering in her eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. There were so many times when Dad would tell me you'd said or done something that seemed off, and I just believed him. I never thought to question it." "Like what?" Sarah asked, her phone still recording. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "He told me Mom had called him 3 times in one day asking when he was coming home, but that she'd forgotten each conversation. He said she'd been leaving lights on all over the house and then denying it. Little things, but they added up to make me worry about her memory." "I never called you 3 times in one day," I said to David. "I barely call you once." "And the lights," Sarah added. "Margaret's always been obsessive about turning off lights. It's one of her quirks." David was looking trapped now, his eyes darting between the 3 of us. "You're all ganging up on me. This is exactly the kind of irrational behavior I've been talking about." "With who?" Emma demanded. "Who have you been talking to about this?" The question hung in the air, and I realized that was what had been eating at me since I'd first overheard David on the phone. Not just that he'd been discussing my supposed mental state, but that he'd been doing it with multiple people. Systematically. Like he was building a case. "Your mother's sister," David said finally. "Your grandmother. A few close friends. People who care about her." My stomach dropped. "You called my mother?" "Someone had to," David replied. "You've been concerning people, Margaret. They needed to know what was happening." "What did you tell them?" My voice was barely a whisper. David looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something calculating in his expression. Something that made me wonder how long this had been going on, and how far it had already gone. "I told them the truth," he said. "That you've been struggling, that I'm worried about you, that I think you might need professional help." The room went completely silent. I could feel Sarah's fury radiating from across the table, could see Emma's face crumpling as she realized the full scope of what her father had been doing. "What kind of professional help?" Sarah asked, her voice dangerously quiet. David's pause told me everything I needed to know, even before he answered. "I've already made some calls." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What kind of calls?" David shifted in his chair, but his voice remained steady. "I contacted Dr. Peterson's office. You remember him? He handled your anxiety issues a few years back. I explained the situation and asked about options for evaluation." My hands started shaking. "You did what?" "Margaret, please try to stay calm. This is exactly what I was talking about. You're getting agitated over nothing." Sarah's chair scraped against the floor as she stood up abruptly. "She's getting agitated because her husband just admitted to calling her doctor behind her back." "Former doctor," Emma said quietly, and we all turned to look at her. Mom switched to Dr. Williams 2 years ago, remember? After Dr. Peterson moved practices? David's face flushed slightly. Yes, well, I spoke with his office first. They referred me to someone else. Who? I demanded. Dr. Chen. She specializes in cognitive decline in middle-aged women. The room felt like it was spinning. Cognitive decline. He'd actually used those words with a medical professional. About me. What exactly did you tell this Dr. Chen? Sarah's voice was ice cold. David looked between the three of us, and I could see him weighing his words carefully. I described the behaviors I'd been observing, the memory issues, the mood swings, the paranoid thinking. Paranoid thinking, I repeated slowly. You mean, like thinking my husband might be lying to me? Margaret, you accused me of hiding your car keys when they were in your purse. You insisted I'd moved your coffee mug when it was sitting right in front of you. These aren't normal behaviors. I stared at him, trying to remember these incidents. The car keys. I had spent 20 minutes looking for them last week, and David had been the one to suggest I check my purse. The coffee mug. I couldn't recall that at all, but David had mentioned it to Emma when she'd visited. Wait, Emma said, her voice getting stronger. Dad, when did the coffee mug thing happen? Last Tuesday morning. You were here having breakfast with us. Emma frowned, looking between David and me. I wasn't here last Tuesday morning. I had that early meeting, remember? I couldn't make our usual coffee date. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stepped closer to the table. David, what did you actually tell Dr. Chen about Margaret's supposed symptoms? I told her about the forgetfulness, the confusion, the way Margaret's been questioning things that are perfectly normal. And what did Dr. Chen say? David hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw everything. She said it sounded concerning enough to warrant an evaluation. What kind of evaluation? Emma asked. Cognitive testing, maybe some scans to rule out early onset dementia. The word hung in the air like a curse. Dementia. He'd actually suggested to a medical professional that I might have dementia. Sarah sat back down heavily. David, do you understand what you've done? You've created a medical record suggesting Margaret has cognitive issues based on incidents that apparently never happened? They did happen, David insisted, but his voice lacked conviction now. Like the coffee mug incident that couldn't have happened because Emma wasn't even here? Sarah shot back. I found my voice again, though it sounded strange to my own ears. What else did you tell her? This Dr. Chen? David looked down at his hands. I may have mentioned that you'd been having trouble managing household tasks, that you seemed confused about schedules and appointments. I manage everything in this house, I said slowly. The bills, the calendar, the appointments, everything. And what did Dr. Chen recommend based on all this false information? Sarah demanded. David's next words made my blood run cold. She said if the symptoms were progressing as quickly as I described, we might need to consider involuntary commitment for evaluation. The words hit me like a physical blow. Involuntary commitment. The room seemed to tilt, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. You told a doctor I needed to be locked up? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Emma shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Dad, what is wrong with you? Mom is sitting right here having a completely rational conversation. How could you ever think she needed to be committed? David's face had gone pale. I was concerned. I thought maybe I was missing something, that maybe the signs were subtle, and I needed professional help to understand what was happening. What signs? Sarah demanded. You just admitted the coffee mug incident never happened because Emma wasn't even here. What other lies did you tell this doctor? I felt something shift inside me, like a door slamming shut on 23 years of trusting this man implicitly. David, I need you to be completely honest with me right now. When did you first contact Dr. Chen? He fidgeted with his wedding ring. About 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. That was before he'd even mentioned divorce. Before any of our recent fights. Before I'd started questioning his late nights or noticed the changes in his behavior. Emma sat back down heavily. 6 weeks ago, Mom and I went to that art exhibit together. She was fine. She drove us there, navigated downtown traffic, remembered all the artists' names better than I did. She even helped me figure out that problem I was having with my lease agreement. And 3 weeks ago, she helped me reorganize my entire filing system. Sarah added. Spent 4 hours creating a logical system that I never would have thought of. Someone with cognitive issues couldn't do that. David ran his hands through his hair. Look, maybe I was wrong about some of the details, but I've been worried. Margaret's been different. More questioning. More suspicious. Suspicious of what? I asked. Of me. Of my work schedule. You've been asking more questions about where I go, what I'm doing. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. You mean I started noticing that your stories weren't adding up? That you were coming home later and later with explanations that didn't make sense? It's not like that. Then what is it like? Emma's voice was sharp with anger. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you started planning to leave Mom weeks ago and decided the best way to do it was to make everyone think she was crazy. Sarah leaned forward. David, did Dr. Chen actually recommend involuntary commitment, or is that another lie? The question hung in the air. David's silence stretched on until it became an answer in itself. She didn't, did she? I said slowly. You made that up too. She said if someone was experiencing rapid cognitive decline, there were options for evaluation. That's not the same thing, Emma said. You're twisting her words just like you twisted everything else. I stood up, needing to move, needing space to think. How many people did you tell about this supposed mental decline of mine? David looked uncomfortable. Just Dr. Chen. And I may have mentioned my concerns to a few people. What people? Your sister called last week asking how you were doing. I told her I was worried about your memory. The betrayal cut deep. My sister lived across the country. If she thought I was having cognitive problems, she'd be worried sick. She might even fly out here thinking she needed to help take care of me. Who else? Sarah asked when I couldn't speak. I talked to Jim at work. Asked him if he'd noticed changes in Margaret when we saw them at the restaurant last month. And what did you tell Jim exactly? Emma's voice was dangerously quiet. I said I was concerned about some forgetfulness, some confusion, that I was trying to figure out if others had noticed it too. I sank back into my chair. You've been systematically destroying my reputation, making people think I can't be trusted, that my perceptions aren't reliable. That wasn't my intention. Then what was your intention? Sarah snapped. Because it looks like you wanted everyone to believe Margaret was losing her mind, so when you left her, people would think it was justified. Poor David, having to deal with his unstable wife. Emma was staring at her father like she'd never seen him before. Is that why you really brought up the divorce in front of us? So we'd witness Mom having an emotional reaction and think she was unstable? David's face flushed red. No, I brought it up because I wanted to be honest about what was happening in our marriage. Honest? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't know the meaning of the word. The front door suddenly opened, and we all froze as footsteps echoed in the hallway. Margaret, I got your message. What's this emergency about? My blood turned to ice. It was my sister's voice. She was supposed to be in California. My hands began to shake. I stared at David, horror washing over me as the pieces clicked into place. You called her. You told her I was having some kind of mental breakdown, didn't you? David's guilty expression was answer enough, but before he could speak, my sister appeared in the doorway. Her face was etched with worry, her usually perfect hair disheveled from what must have been a rushed flight. Margaret, honey, I came as soon as I could. She rushed toward me, reaching out like I might collapse at any moment. David called yesterday and said you were having some kind of episode. He was so worried about you. The room fell silent. I could feel Emma and Sarah watching this unfold, could see the realization dawning on their faces. This wasn't just about David wanting to leave me. This was a calculated campaign to make everyone believe I was losing my mind. What exactly did he tell you? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He said you've been forgetting things, getting confused, having emotional outbursts. He was concerned you might be having some kind of breakdown and needed family support. She glanced around the room, taking in the tense atmosphere. What's going on here? Why does everyone look so serious? I looked at David, waiting. He had orchestrated this moment, brought my sister here under false pretenses. Now he could explain himself to her face. David has something he needs to tell you, I said finally. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I may have overstated some concerns. Overstated? Emma's voice rose. Dad, you made Aunt Jennifer fly across the country because you lied about Mom's mental health. My sister's confusion was evident. Lied? David, what is she talking about? Sarah leaned forward. Jennifer, your husband has been telling people that Margaret is mentally unstable to justify leaving her. He's been creating a narrative that she can't be trusted, that her perceptions aren't reliable. That's not... Jennifer looked between all of us, her worry transforming into something sharper. David, is this true? The weight of having to explain his deception to my sister seemed to break something in David. His shoulders sagged. I've been unhappy in the marriage for a while. And yes, I thought if people understood that Margaret was going through some difficulties, they'd be more supportive of my decision to leave. Difficulties that you made up, I said. Jennifer stared at her brother-in-law with growing disgust. You made me think my sister was having a mental health crisis. I canceled meetings, rearranged my entire week, spent money I don't have on a last-minute flight because I thought she needed me. She does need support, David said weakly. Divorce is hard on everyone. Support for a divorce you want, not support for a mental breakdown you fabricated. Jennifer's voice was ice cold. Do you have any idea what you've put me through? I've been terrified for 2 days thinking Margaret might be losing her mind. I watched this exchange feeling strangely detached. Here was my sister, who I'd been worried about disappointing, discovering the truth about David's manipulation. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the anger at what he'd put both of us through. I need to know exactly who else you've told these lies to, I said to David, because I'm going to have to contact every single person and explain what really happened. David looked trapped. It wasn't many people. That's not what I asked. Emma pulled out her phone. I'm making a list. Start talking, Dad. As David began to reluctantly name the people he'd spoken to about my supposed mental decline, I felt something shifting inside me. The fear I'd been carrying for weeks was transforming into something else entirely. I wasn't the unstable one in this marriage. I wasn't the one who couldn't be trusted. Jennifer sat down next to me, her face still flushed with anger. "Margaret, I am so sorry. If I had known what he was really doing—" "You couldn't have known," I said. "That's the insidious thing about what he did. He used your love for me against both of us." Sarah was watching David with barely concealed contempt as he continued listing names. "This is going to take weeks to undo." "Some of these people might never fully believe Margaret again, no matter what explanation she gives." "Then we'll deal with that as it comes," Emma said firmly. "But right now, we need to figure out how to protect Mom going forward." David looked up sharply. "Protect her from what?" "From you," Jennifer said. "From whatever other lies you might decide to tell to make yourself look better in this divorce." The word hung in the air between us. Divorce. It was really happening, but now I understood it wasn't my failure. It was his choice, his deception, his betrayal. And somehow, that knowledge was giving me strength I didn't know I had. But as I looked around at the faces of the people who truly cared about me, I realized David still had one more card to play. His eyes had that familiar calculating look, and I braced myself for whatever he was about to say next. David straightened in his chair, and I recognized that look. It was the same expression he'd worn when he used to prepare his closing arguments in court. Cold, calculated, ready to deliver a final blow. "You know what?" David said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Maybe I should have been more direct about what I've observed." "Margaret, you've been acting erratic for months. The way you've been clinging to routines, getting upset over small changes, crying at random moments. Those are normal responses to feeling like your marriage is falling apart," Jennifer shot back. "Are they?" David continued, his lawyer persona fully engaged now. "What about the time you accused me of moving your coffee mug when you'd simply put it in a different spot? Or when you insisted I was deliberately changing the thermostat to mess with you?" I felt a chill run down my spine. Those incidents had happened, but hearing them described this way, stripped of context, made them sound paranoid and unhinged. Emma was staring at her father with disgust. "Dad, you were gaslighting her. Of course she was questioning herself." "Was I?" David asked smoothly. "Or was I dealing with a wife who was becoming increasingly difficult to live with?" "Margaret, tell them about the night you called me 17 times when I was at dinner with a client." My face burned with shame. "You said you'd be home by 8. It was past midnight and you weren't answering your phone. I was worried something had happened." 17 calls, Margaret, in 4 hours. "Because you were lying about where you were," I said, my voice shaking. "You were with her, weren't you? That's why you couldn't answer." David's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw the truth in his eyes. Then it was back in place, smooth and professional. Jennifer stood up abruptly. "This is exactly what abusers do. They create the chaos, then point to their victim's reaction to that chaos as proof of instability." "I'm not an abuser," David said calmly. "I'm a man who's been trying to handle a difficult situation with as much grace as possible." "Grace?" Emma's voice cracked with anger. "You call destroying Mom's reputation grace?" "I call it being honest about what I've been dealing with." The room fell silent. I could feel David's strategy working, could see how easily he was twisting the narrative. Even knowing the truth, part of me was starting to question my own memories. my own reactions. "You're doing it right now," I said quietly. "You're doing exactly what you've been doing for months, making me doubt myself, making everyone doubt me." "I'm stating facts." "No," Jennifer said firmly. "You're weaponizing her natural responses to your manipulation." "Margaret, remember what you told me yesterday? You said you felt like you were losing your mind, but you couldn't figure out why." I nodded, remembering that conversation clearly. "That's because he was making you lose it," Jennifer continued, "deliberately. And now he's using your confusion and pain as evidence that you were the problem all along?" David shrugged, but I caught something in his expression. A flicker of satisfaction, like he was pleased with how effectively he'd planted these seeds of doubt. "You know what the saddest part is?" Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. I almost believed it. For just a minute there, listening to you list all those things, I almost wondered if Mom really was. "That's the point," I said, understanding flooding through me. "That's exactly the point. He's so good at this that even the people who love me most might start to question what's real." David checked his watch with theatrical precision. "I think I've said everything I need to say. Margaret, I'll have my lawyer contact yours about the divorce proceedings." "David," I called as he stood to leave. "I want you to know that I'm going to tell everyone the truth. Every single person you lied to. I'm going to explain exactly what you did and why." He paused at the door. "Go ahead. But ask yourself this, Margaret. After everything that's happened, after all your erratic behavior these past months, who do you think they're going to believe? A respected attorney? Or a woman who everyone already thinks might be having a breakdown?" The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving the three of us sitting in stunned silence. Emma was the first to speak. "Mom, we're going to fight this. We're going to make sure everyone knows the truth." "He's right about one thing, though," I said slowly. "Some people might never believe me. The damage is already done." Jennifer reached over and took my hand. "Then we'll prove it through your actions going forward. We'll show everyone who you really are." I looked at my sister and my daughter, both of them looking at me with such fierce love and determination, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. "You know what?" I said, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. "Let him try to destroy my reputation. I know who I am. You know who I am. And anyone who chooses to believe his lies over the evidence of 30 years of knowing me, well, maybe they weren't really my friends to begin with." Emma smiled for the first time all day. "There's my mom." "I'm still here," I said. "I've been here all along. I just forgot for a while."